Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Monday, December 25th, Christmas, for a lot of the people in the world. Certainly, maybe not all if you added up all of the Middle Eastern and Asian countries that don't traditionally celebrate Christmas. Yeah, maybe not even a majority of the world. Anyways, so today's just sticking with the Monday, Wednesday, Friday streaming. It made a lot of sense. Certainly just to keep on stream early. Probably won't get very many views today, but I mean, same would have been true had I skipped it and done it tomorrow or waited till Wednesday or... I mean, it is just going to be a dead time of year regardless. This is where you would traditionally have in TV your pre-recorded Christmas special that you might even air the next year or the year after that, and just have one, maybe two Christmas specials for a series. Or you just have nothing air at all traditionally on TV, and then instead air a Christmas movie instead in that time slot. More often than not, it is air nothing at all. There are a few shows that do try to have Christmas specials. And then the general idea of a Christmas special would be it would have been recorded months in advance and nobody actually would have been working. Speaking of not working, I don't think it's really necessary to say their customer service will be available through the New Year period. However, depending on the inquiry, the responses may be after 2024 January 3rd. We appreciate your understanding. Like, do you really need to say that to everybody? I get the idea of maintenance notices in games, because that's going to be some downtime for the people who really want to play. I get the idea of issues and change logs in games, but Yu-Gi-Oh! In particular just has way too many notifications that they're shoving in the face of every single player. Another thing I thought of when I was looking at this is there is a factor here. When 2 years ago we started playing, they made Master Duel when it first came out, where El Shadal Construct was a big card. It was a major meta card that people, probably in Japan, people actually playing the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game in real world were playing it. But boy, is it just irrelevant now. And the same is true for Eldritch the Golden Lord. I think this one's probably not playable. I never even saw some of these cards actually being playable in meta decks. A lot of these art things. Now, there are some iconic Blue Eyes, and there's Dark Magician. Certainly that makes sense. But it just kind of doesn't... A lot of these don't make sense. And then you have the World Legacy, which was more of a solo mode story, and you can tell there's just a completely different type of art style here. Wish there was a way to see this bigger. I guess you could do that. Yeah. Completely different type of art style for this image compared to every single other image where it is just one character as a wallpaper. I guess this one might be more of a group image, but yeah, I would say for the most part, most of these cards, most of these things were never relevant to me as far as characters. This one has two dragons fighting, or fusing, I guess. Here you have a very different image with a full background, and it just felt like there was a lot of characters and a lot of stuff going on. Felt much more like a Shadowverse image. Now, Access Code Talker is still very viable in my deck. Then here we have another image that almost certainly is supposed to be a Christmas image. It continues the inconsistency as far as what you have on the artwork. And the wallpapers aren't even done particularly nicely here because it's really just showing you in this empty section. It's not changing the wallpaper for the rest of the game. But yeah, here you have access code talker still being prevalent. And it is still a very playable card. I finished the 30-second Extreme Duel set. Unfortunately, that then immediately opened a pack, which gave me some cards that really don't matter too much. And then it unlocked a 24-hour secret pack that 24 hours passed and I did nothing with. I do have enough gems here, so it probably does behoove me to think about opening 20-30 packs of one of these if any of these are really a viable target. I would say this is definitely not a viable target because I have 3 or 4 copies of most of the normals and rares and a decent amount of the super rares, so that wouldn't work. Move to the next one and we'll see here. Still not really a candidate on this one either. We're looking for big gaps. A lot of missing cards. Still not really a viable candidate here either. So it may very well be a case where none of these are viable candidates. Yeah, I would still say that's the case. Or it may be a case that I'm misjudging and I have just so many cards now that a select pack like this might make some sense. A featured secret pack. Alright, so if those aren't viable, then the question to ask, and these are advertisements for things that are just lower down here, I believe. Beginning next journey, Mighty Contenders, Dragon Kings from the Abyss. Mighty Contenders, beginning next journey, Dragon Kings from the Abyss. Okay, so let's look at the normal packs and see if we've got anything here. It's a decent candidate. This is a very good candidate, I think, to go with. So, Singularity Warrior may be it. This is a bad candidate. This is a decent candidate too. So beginning of the next journey and Singularity Warrior seem to be the ones to do. So let's start with this, and hopefully this isn't going to be a huge mistake. I think we probably just want to stop here. You've got a good deck here, good pack here, good pack here, decent pack here, decent pack here. So yeah, I barely could get through the 30-second duels. Even trying to pay a lot of attention, put my most amount of attention into it. It's just a lot you have to do, particularly for Yu-Gi-Oh!, where Yu-Gi-Oh! Is totally designed around doing a lot of synergies and playing a lot of actions per turn to really win. And most of the people I was playing against were still struggling at that same level. I think one of the victories I got was just because somebody ran out of time, and then the other victory, using my Zodiac Tri-Brigade deck, in a minimal, fast fashion one. So even in a special duel that's extremely different, like the 30-second duels from last stream, I'm still just back to playing Zodiac Tri-Brigade, which I've been playing for over a year now, it feels like. And there's no end in sight as far as building a new meta deck or trying to get any higher or do any better. Like there really is almost no level of cards here that I could unlock that would give me an understanding or idea, because I'm not really looking at the cards as to building my own deck, and there's no real way to share decks easily online where they could look at my account and say, here's the best new meta deck you could build, and here's the cards you're missing. We just generally don't get enough crafting points to craft the cards you need. In particular, because you can't trade up the normal crafting points at a sharp ratio, a bad ratio, to get rare cards, and you can't trade up rare crafting points to get super rare crafting points, and you can't trade up super rare crafting points to get ultra rare crafting points, when really it should just be all one currency, and it should just be more expensive to make an ultra rare card than a super rare, than a rare, than a normal. Now this is going to open a whole bunch of secret packs. Well, so far it's been only 2. We've gotten a lot of new cards though. So, a decent amount of cards there, but not really enough time to just go through all of this. Yeah, I just can't imagine there being that many people that want to go and look through all these cards. And I guess that's what separates the real collectible card players from the pretenders like me, is that there probably are people who, particularly when they have physical cards, that do go through their cards and read what they do and look at the pictures, and spend a significant amount of time doing that. Certainly that was my experience back when I was much younger, many years ago, playing Magic the Gathering, is that I was alone a lot of time, and I was making it something that I was very interested in. So since I couldn't actually play the game, there was a lot of looking at cards and deck building. But once you make it an automated process, once you look at it from the perspective of modern day, it really is just not that likely that somebody's gonna main, for lack of a better term, their a collectible card game and put all of their attention into it. There are fighting game people. This secret pack we unlocked wasn't a good candidate. That perhaps make a better argument as far as the type of people that would main one game and focus on it. This is still probably a decent candidate of a deck to buy another 10 packs for. The thing here is there's a couple of rares we didn't get even one copy on. There's a lot here we only have like 2 copies on. There's still a lot of super rares and ultra rares. Let's consider that compared to, I think it was not this one, but the other one. Kind of feels like things are moving around. No, this is a much better candidate to spend 10 on. And then I probably should be saving some of this. See, there's no Master Duel on this one, no purple deck pack. saw slick deals of an advent calendar that was just a collection of Pokemon trading card packs, but honestly, I think Pokemon trading card packs in general can be very, very low quality, like, in that it can be some very old packs that aren't really playable anymore, or it can be very cheap packs. Even the concept kind of falls apart here, and I'm kind of glad Yu-Gi-Oh! And most collectible card games don't try something like that, where it's a entire advent of 25 days in which they give rewards for playing a card game. It's not just card games. I'm glad most games don't do that. As far as the accountability section in my Smart On Air sign, after what felt like 3 weeks of struggling with the expressive PSP IDF way of building programs and installing programs, I finally got it to work. And so now I have retraced my steps and just rewritten a decent amount of code to get almost back to where I was with the Arduino code, all for the sake overall just to be able to actually enable encryption on the firmware. So as a product being put out, the Smart On Air sign can't just easily be cloned in a week, and then my faint, probably a little crazy hope of having a product that actually would make a decent amount of money, or any money, would go out the window. But yeah, I'm still having trouble in rewriting the code, and then there is this daunting thought that at some point I'm gonna have to rewrite the code all over again, because I'll want to update it to a newer version. Although there's gonna have to be like a really good reason to do that too. It's gonna have to be some kind of new features I think of, some perhaps feedback from people as far as what they might want and what might be better in a version 2.0 of the code. A lot of my code is still very much reliant on libraries, although I severely reduced the libraries and changed the libraries. One of the libraries I've modified, I had to modify so much that, yeah, it's effectively not even the same. In particular, there's a weird thing there where there should be what's called a callback, where a function would be run after a certain action is taken, and in this case, when the erase button is run, it should be calling a custom callback function to do some other erasing, but it's just not. It's not programmed that way, it's not written that way, and that's in part some of my concern. Maybe I could make it 2 elements nowadays. But yeah, that's some of my concern, is that this one library I'm leaning on potentially is gonna need to just be need to be completely eliminated and rewritten. And if I got rid of that one library, then the rest of the 2 or 3 libraries I have would be a little bit easier, and I'm gonna probably lose another library just upgrading from ESP's IDF version 4 to version 5 anyways. A lot of this might have taken longer, but it might have just been easier to have started writing the code that way, and to, if I knew now if I knew then what I know now, then I potentially would have just programmed my own web server, which is one of the libraries that it's relying on. But yeah, I've got it. I've made major improvement from being just unable to install the app at all to now it is consistently installing the apps. When it gives me an error, it's only giving me like one error that I can really handle, whereas when a library is missing, it's usually giving me dozens of errors. So this one says at least one super rare guaranteed in 10 packs. One of these should be the one we just looked at. It should say something different here. Here it goes. Ultra rare guaranteed in 10 packs versus at least one super rare. Now, I would have been really peeved if that had not been there. Of course, you still have to pay another 1,000 points, another 1,000 gems, and if you just don't have those 1,000 gems, you could still be easily screwed in that system. It would be nice, particularly in a digital game like this where card packs really have no value and cards really have no value, for them to chain roll packs and just say, hey, you bought 10 packs and you didn't get an ultra rare, so we're going to just keep on giving you packs in general until you do get an ultra rare. Then it could feel like it's just continuously doubling down and doubling down, although it technically wouldn't be doubling down. It'd feel like a different, exciting way to depict the pity mechanics that often are in gacha games, and this is effectively a gacha game. But yeah, one of the things I had to rewrite is that in the last stream I said I was abandoning little fs as a file system to save the configuration files and using SPI-FS, which is an older technology as a file system. Well, I couldn't get the program on the Smart On Air side to work with that either. Just the libraries being built just wouldn't happen. So eventually, I just realized I don't actually need a file system per se at all. There is a partition table in the ESP32, and you can change how the partition table is to use little fs or SPI-FS, but I couldn't figure out how to get it to work. And without having a partition labeled in the partition table, then obviously I couldn't get it to mount. But by default, it already has a partition for non-volatile storage, which MVS kind of abandons the metaphor of a file system for an embedded device in favor of having still really what is a file system, but it being much more based on a key pair system. So instead of having a file name and opening a file and then reading out of that file a bunch of lines of text and then adapting all those lines of text into different values in a configuration file. So you might have a CSV file, comma separated value file, you might have a YAML file, you might have something like that. You might have just a single variable on the first line and a different variable on the second line. Instead of having any of that, NVS just says, you know what, you're going to have a label for your key, and you're going to have several types of variables, whether it's going to be a number or an integer or a string or a binary blob, and you're just going to set that value and erase that value, and that's pretty much it, which is much more simpler of a system, but it actually was really all I needed. Now, at some level, if I needed to create a non-volatile storage of a extremely long bit of text, or if I needed an extremely long binary of a image that needed to change and be like drawable or redrawable, then MVS might get a little bit more difficult, but not so much. So yeah, my hint that I've learned here is I should have just been programming with NVS in the first place, and that would have worked particularly well. Now, I did have some trouble with just trying to erase the NVS, and I'm not 100% sure that the erase command will just erase everything, and I may literally have to name every single key and one by one erase it, which is not that big. It's about 10 keys. And that's the way I want it to work anyways. When somebody connects their Smart On Air sign to a internet and then they hit the erase button wanting to erase everything, it should erase the Wi-Fi access point and the password, which it does automatically through a different process because that's more secured and encrypted. But it also should erase the extra configuration files. What I don't want to create is a security leak here where the password for connecting to OBS via the WebSocket protocol is retrievable if you can just erase the Wi-Fi access point, or if you had erased the Wi-Fi access point and then you put in a new Wi-Fi access point information, and then all of a sudden it tells the password again. When you erase things, you want everything erased, although not everything, because there is still one password that needs to not be erased, and in that case that is the thing to connect directly to the Wi-Fi sign as opposed to it connecting to your Wi-Fi router. I think we got enough cards here now, although still might be a fairly decent candidate, but we now have gotten several new secret packs, and this could just continuously drain my gems. And then January 1st will roll around. This is interesting because this is all extra cards, and I'm actually very low on extra cards. Why would there be a deck just full of extra cards? I like it as a concept, and frankly, having more extra cards would probably be extremely helpful. What pack is this? Nope, I clicked on the wrong thing, didn't I? Cards in this pack, I should have clicked on feature cards. That's why I was so confused. Yeah, this isn't a candidate. Yep. Obviously, I don't have a lot of extra cards. Extra cards are harder to use. Which one was I just looking at? Probably was looking at this one. We'll just go through the top 4. Oh, I think I'm actually looking at the wrong thing, aren't I? So I think I opened a bunch of secret packs, but the secret packs I opened wouldn't be the ones that are new. It would be the ones, and they all say 23 hours, which shows how useless the timer is. It's probably these. So we'll just go through all these and see if any of this is really a candidate. Right now, on top of just needing to rewrite the code all over again on the Smart On Air side, I'm struggling with a parse message command that should work just perfectly. It has no options or anything, and it's just not working. So I'm having to potentially jump into that and look into its header file and see what the deal is there. Yeah, I think we've looked at everything here. I think we can generally say none of these are that big of a candidate. These Duels Cup Packs tickets, I guess, are just going to stay around forever just because they didn't want to always have Legacy Pack tickets here. Another thing I've not gotten around to, as I've been incredibly distracted with the Smart On Air sign, is doing any of the solo stuff, which, yeah, there's definitely room for more solo mode pre-recorded footage. Plus doing that would help me fill in some gaps, I would say. Get this 40 gems if that matters. 15 days, so there's been a total of 10 days I haven't logged in. I definitely am not logging in every day on Yu-Gi-Oh! I don't think there's ever been a consistent time in which I have been. It's a bad reward system, just because you really just don't need to do that. So yeah, I just used my Tri-Brigade deck as the Extreme Duel deck. Why does this say I don't have this card? Oh, this is Tri-Brigade Sprite. Anyways, this isn't my normal Tri-Brigade deck. So if we go in here and dismantle all the extra cards for all those packs we opened, I'll get 820 more normal crafting points, 610 rare crafting points, 50 super rare crafting points, and 10 ultra rare crafting points. Which, overall, at some point, if I was to spend extra energy on it, would lead me down the path of trying to craft at least one copy of all the cards here, which this is sorted in a way to show that past this point we are really at 75% of all the cards, all 10,000 to 7,000 cards that are in this game. I have about 75% of them, like at least one copy of them. There is still 25% of cards I don't have at least one copy from, and all it's really going to do at some point is create a situation where I would need to give up on that excuse as to not having the cards as to why I don't have a successful deck. Because once you have all the cards, or at least one copy of all the cards, it's much more viable there to potentially start making more playable decks. Of course, in many cases, the good cards, you're really talking 2,000 to 3,000 cards are actually playable and viable, and you're going to want 2 or 3 copies of them, and the significant amount of the viable cards are just going to just be ultra rares anyways. I'm not 100% sure if everybody got beginning of the next journey as its reward for doing this extreme duel. But yeah, this extreme duel is going to go away for Extreme Duel 2, which Extreme Duel 2 has another incredibly constricting rule to it that I'll try certainly, but I'm not anywhere as hyped about Extreme Duel 2 as I was with Extreme Duel 1, and even in that Extreme Duel 1 I lost the interest in it very quickly, just as far as how practical that would be. If I was to think about ways to create a new collectible card game, I think that there's a lot of conflicting ideas, certainly, because the core idea is you want people to continuously buy packs and continuously make more money for it. It is just DLC gacha over and over again. So in the digital form, you would feed characters, or in this case cards, into other cards to make them stronger. How can you do that in a digital form? I mean, in a real world form, which I think you probably do need some level of a real world form of a collectible card game to make it work, instead of just going digital only. Digital only, it more than likely is the case you need to have a digital card game that plays similar but not exactly the same as the real world cards go. But yeah, because you're constantly trying to have a because you're constantly trying to have people buy cards and have cards, you want large decks. A deck of 10 cards is way too small. A deck of 20 cards maybe gets close enough to being good enough, but yeah. Oh yeah. Well, you know what? I'm gonna live with the auto position selecting and just see if it really affects too much, because that could save me a little bit of energy. And they may have better programmed the auto position selecting anyways, and some of the concerns about the auto positioning that existed originally in this game may not exist. Since you want 20 to 40 to 80 cards in a deck, I would think that there's probably room for some kind of chain system. You see it somewhat in Yu-Gi-Oh!, in which you potentially summon the Zodiac thing and then you attach cards to it. So if the idea of card attachment in general always existed, and you could drain more cards out of your deck, then that would be interesting. And maybe that could lead to another problem with a lot of collectible card games or trading card games, is that the attacks get kind of crazy. Like, effectively there's like one card in Yu-Gi-Oh that does 50 or 10 damage. Everything else is in multiples of 100. So you have things that are 100 attack up to 3,200, 4,500, maybe even higher attacks. So you could just divide by 100, and you could say you can chain up to 3 cards for this low level 3-star monster, and then your attack will be 300, but it removes 3 options by putting those 3 cards under it. But then, yeah, that potentially also opens up a possibility of I don't think that was the right move. Yeah, that was totally the wrong move. That would have only worked had I placed that card down. But yeah, it would also potentially fix a thing where you have on your first hand maybe 3 to 5 monsters that you're going to put on the field, and those are going to be your champions, and they're going to potentially stay around for a lot longer instead of what Yu-Gi-Oh has to do, which is you're constantly sacrificing monsters and putting them in the graveyard, and you're putting cards in defense mode to save yourself for one turn. There could just be a lot more magic cards that, instead of a magic card saying this increases or halves somebody's attack, it just increases or decreases the number of cards attached. It also potentially could be a case where you could increase the attack of an opponent's character by attaching cards from their deck, but then still have the same rule that once they're out of cards, they lose, or if they're out of cards, they can't really do anything. So yeah, there's definitely room to play around with it. You could definitely try and simplify the thing. There's a major problem in cards that there are walls of text and rules and concepts where a lot of that could be rethought, simplified, or just not included. You almost certainly want to make a new collectible card game somewhat simple, because you know over the years, if it succeeds, it is going to only get more complicated. I don't really agree with the idea of mana and land like Magic has it. That feels like a very old-fashioned concept for collectible card games, and just not really something that needs to exist. But yeah, there's there is probably some level, although it would be an intriguing experiment at least to try to see if you could have it where every single character is summonable, but it can only summon up to a star level. So perhaps a 4-star level character can only attach up to 4 cards to be 4 have an attack of 400 or 4, probably just 4, one attack per card, and then perhaps you could summon a 6 or 8-star level character, in part by sacrificing tributing a 4-star character card, and then attaching that attack that way. That might work very well to limit the amount of spaces, because you don't inherently need 5 spaces. There's very little features, even in Yu-Gi-Oh, where having 5 spaces is necessary. Spelling out final, having enough room for the 5 pieces of Exodia are pretty much the only things I know of where you need 5 spots. And even Yu-Gi-Oh! In Yu-Gi-Oh! Rush eliminated it down to 3 spaces. So they definitely seem like they recognize that 5 is a little too much, and having a field spell. I'm not sure you really need field spells. Or at least a unique field spell, and I don't know if you really need an extra monster position and the whole pointing mechanic. Even though that is an interesting gimmick, it's... Let's see. I guess the real question certainly is a basis they speculate on as far as what would I do if I made attempt to make a new collectible card game, is how viable really could that be? Because the truth is it's not really viable. Like, there's too many artists you would have to hire, too many writers, or you need backstory people. You'd almost certainly need a major involvement of either Wizards of the Coast or a Japanese company of some sort, or Asian company of some sort, to do all the animation and the story writing and the promotion and the printing even would be difficult. I imagine the technology as far as printing collectible card games in Japan is actually a lot better than printing cards in the United States. I like the gimmick of having clear cards, but I don't know how you really implement that into anything. And like I said, I like the idea of potentially feeding cards into other cards, but I don't know how you do that either. I suppose if there was a system like a QR code where you could tear up a card and get part of its QR code and then merge it into another card, or put it on the back of another card, or put it in a sleeve on the back side of a card. There might be something to that, but what you really can't do is have a stack of cards from game to game and say, here I have this card that I'm feeding 50 other garbage cards into, and thus it's more powerful. Because then that would be way thicker. Even a card being twice as thick as average is going to be incredibly cheaty. Or weighing more would be even cheaty. It'd be very easy to cheat with that stuff. It honestly feels like there would need to be a mail-in system when you mail in your cards, and it gives you a stronger version of that card. Which I'm surprised nobody's ever actually done that. You make people send a self-addressed stamped envelope, which is not something I imagine kids really do these days, in the mail, sending in a card, and then you send a thing through the mail back. That's too expensive. The postage would kill you. You would really need a vending machine type thing where you scan in a card. And that might work if they had some kind of unique identifier on them, and then you were shredding old cards, and by shredding old cards it lets you get new cards. Probably the best thing you could do, though, would be to have kind of a machine ticket shredder device in arcades, and when you shredded 10 cards, it would give you one new random card, and then it would just be very gambly at that level. I could see that existing in comic book shops, and honestly, you could probably build a device like that to work pretty well right now without any involvement from any collectible card company. You could have a device that could scan Magic the Gathering cards and say, this looks like a Magic the Gathering card well enough that I'm not really concerned about it. I'm going to shred these 10 land cards and give you a random new land card, or 2 land cards. You'd have to put some real values on it, but that's kind of what they're doing in Yu-Gi-Oh! In Magic the Gathering anyways at the moment, is there are people that straight up open packs and just destroy the land cards and tear them in half for not even particularly good reasons. Just out of, I guess, spite or a flawed thought process of it potentially increasing the value of the rarity of land cards, which are not rare at all, and the basic land cards aren't. But yeah, if you made a shredder like that, at least then there would be recycling going on, which that too has a level of appeal, is to have some recycling going on. Let's see. Guess we'll get rid of this one. I don't think there's anything else I can really do here. I could get access code talker. That would get my attack a little bit higher. But would it get it up to 42? I don't think it would. Let's see. 42 is the number to go for. Yeah, it would have been 53. Okay. So I made a little bit of a mistake there. I know there was something else I did with the Smart On Air sign as far as just working with the programming. I recognize some of the HTML is not necessary, and in an effort to make the HTML work again, because it seems like it's working half the time and not working, I'm gonna have to rewrite a major part of that as far as a drop-down option, and potentially I may just have to eliminate some options anyways, and that's gonna suck, but it's not a really good system anyway you wrap it. It's just far too many options. Usually in a pull-down menu you're looking for 5 to 20 options, you're not looking for 625 options, which is where I believe it ended up as far as different hotkey settings to trigger. It turns out that the HTML option tags if you don't set a value, we'll just automatically set the value to be whatever the text is between the opening and the closing option tag, which is what I was using it for anyways. So by removing value equals something 625 times, well, you've eliminated several kilobytes of data that would have to be loaded every time the page is loaded, of repetitive data. Oh yes, the other thing I did is I moved too fast, and I'm working in Windows PowerShell to move some files around, and I deleted an actually important file, and so I spent an extra hour or two trying to recover that file, text file. It's a tiny little text file. It didn't go in the recycling bin because in PowerShell it doesn't, I guess, which is a shame. That's a danger. PowerShell is much closer to Linux, and most Linux don't have a recycling bin. The files I'm using aren't in my documents folder where they really should be, so they're not getting daily or hourly backups, which in this case, there are these rare situations where it really would be nice to have on the updates fairly often, and that is one of the things that, working in GitHub, it's supposed to fix, but I've never really been able to integrate GitHub into the workflow. But yeah, Git as a program is literally designed for that one thing, where you would delete a file or change a file, and you could go back and undo those changes, just track changes. Although I find Git in general really seems to be more focused on making larger swooping changes. It's not so much the style of changes that when you're just hardcore programming and you're changing like one sentence, one line, and then you're building and seeing if that works. That's not really how it usually works as far as versions go. It's much more, here we changed 100 lines, or we changed 5 or 6 lines, and so it still creates that situation where if you really changed even 2 things and then something stops working, well, then you've got to investigate 2 things. If you change 100 things and something stops working, you have to go back and investigate 100 things. It only makes sense if you literally are making a different version for every single 1 sentence change you make. And yeah, generally that's just not how people think and want to work. Eventually I found a file that was close enough to the file. It may not have actually been the file that I worked with most recently. I struggled quite a bit to undelete the file using the spin-off for the newer version of test disk called photo recovery, and what it effectively did is it found about 500 text files, of recent text files, a lot of them being either from building other older versions of the program, since every time I build the program it's making probably about 1200 files, just header files, source code files, things you'd never really look at, but it's making those files over and over again very quickly. They're small files. It really only takes about a minute at most to build this program. It's not a huge program, relatively speaking. It's a huge program for an embedded processor. It's about 3 megabytes. But yeah, it found 500 text files, and I just had to open each text file and say, well, that doesn't look like that, that doesn't look like it, that doesn't look like it, just one by one. No real better system exists. than that. And that was just a stupid mistake. It wasn't a stupid mistake that took as long as it could have. And I could have recovered it, but I didn't want to lose the information I'd already made. It definitely was a minor problem that should have been avoided. And even my Borg backup program, which doesn't run well enough, and I've actually upgraded it now to make daily backups. It probably wouldn't work that well because Borg backup with the way I know how to use it using the graphical user interface called Vorta is more kind of focused on mounting the entire backup, the entire drive, which you're talking 8 or 10 gigs that would have to be transferred over a network to mount to a different drive to then browse around. Generally, I've only used Borg backup to make a weekly backup of most of my computer. It's in the hope that if my entire computer broke, it would make some changes I could restore. My bigger concern at the moment, and I know I'm rambling here and not really talking about video games as I play Yu-Gi-Oh, which I suppose my goal for today really is just to see if we could get to Diamond, or probably not gonna make it though. I would have to almost certainly take an extra few days of doing nothing but playing Yu-Gi-Oh to get up to Diamond. So what I'm doing right now is probably wasting my time. Yeah, my bigger concern right now is not so much that my computer would break, which is always a concern. My bigger concern is that Windows 10 is getting old enough, and Windows 10 is going to try and force more people to Windows 11, which I guess I could live with that. It would be annoying, certainly, but my bigger concern is that it would just stop being usable. I'm not 100% sure that I really, even in my situation, want to go to another Windows operating system yet again. It may be that we are finally at a point where a Steam OS might work well enough for all my wants and needs. Not sure I fully believe that, but yeah. The programming stuff I use is pretty much already available on anyways. And OBS is on Linux. So really would just be, I guess, a question about moving on to a Steam OS, and is that viable and is that reasonable? It probably is not reasonable. I think we probably still are very much in a situation where if I'm supposed to have my computer be the equivalent of a gaming computer that people can expect to have a similar experience to the game as what I'm having, then I kind of still need to have Windows installed. I don't want a dual boot or anything like that. Yeah, so I kind of would need to see other people moving to SteamOS. I can see a lot of other people moving to Chrome OS and SteamOS and just using iPhones and Androids for most of their day-to-day stuff. Most people, I think, really are really just stuck on using old versions of Microsoft Office or things like that, if they are still using Windows anyways. They just haven't investigated and don't know where to look to find new software and learn that new software. And so inherently they're being forced to learn new operating systems like Windows 11 and the new ways operating systems look, when really they could have moved over to Chrome OS and just done most of what they were going to do via browser anyways. Google Docs is a great example of that. For the people minimally using a Word editor, Google Docs is, in my opinion, a very viable option online instead of having Microsoft Office. But if you've spent most of your career or most of your life using Office, and you know a whole bunch of Office tricks that you're actually using, arguably you might just be showing off with those tricks. You don't want to have to relearn that. So you would rather stick with what you use most of the time, which is the Office window, versus Windows, which is just the launcher. Once you are in Windows 11 or any Windows, once you've opened a program, the Windows operating system goes away, visually speaking. You just don't have to look at it. Yeah. I have my Twitter open here, and yeah, I guess there is just a way to stream video to Twitter. Yeah. One of the things also I want to mention is that one of my websites that's open on Firefox right now has been hijacked by some level, or it has what Windows Defender is detecting as a phishing page, phishing script. It's being detected multiple times and then deleted automatically by Windows Defender. Which, that makes a lot of sense, really. That would be exactly the point you might think of releasing a payload. Not that there's likely going to be a ton of people online on any website on Christmas Day, but there's just not likely going to be that many people paying attention either. So if you can sneak in some phishing into a place like Twitter or GameDeveloper.com or Gamatsu or Video Games Chronicle, potentially people won't find that the phishing thing has been snuck in, the phishing virus, for several days. Enough days where you could potentially get it on end users' computers. Of course, if Windows Defender is finding it automatically, then it is definitely more of a script kiddie, not a phishing virus, not a 0 day, we've never seen this before, this is really dangerous type of virus. Phishing is dangerous in general, but if it's getting caught, it's getting caught. I guess if you were going to target a day specifically, you probably would want to put, you would probably secretly gain access and then sit on having access to a website until they put out some new update, which would imply that if I was going to pick what website actually is infected, and it might just be a random website that I have a page open from, I have a ton of programming pages open from random searches. But if I was to pick one of the video game sites, GameDeveloper.com just changed their entire visuals and looks. That probably would be my guess as to who was being actually infected there. Just for that reason. But if you were gonna pick just a random, need to fusion summon again. Yep. Yeah. If I was gonna pick a random day, Christmas is definitely a decent day to pick. Cyber Monday, Black Friday is probably a little bit better of a day to pick, but that might take you might have to wait until that comes around. Same is true for Christmas, I suppose. Patch Tuesdays happen generally on like the first or second week. I think Microsoft puts out Patch Tuesdays on the second Tuesday of every month. So if you targeted releasing a virus after Patch Tuesday happened on the Wednesday there, people might blame any weirdness on the Microsoft Update patches. That might be a good day in general to pick for your nefarious deeds. So, yeah. Probably wasted some time here just playing, which is fine. If I want to play Yu-Gi-Oh, I'll just play Yu-Gi-Oh, but as far as fusion summoning, pendulum summoning, and leak summoning, didn't even get that done. As far as the proficiency thing, I still have not found a way to fusion summon 3 monsters. And I just don't see getting that done anytime soon. And then I am at reward 4 on platinum, so if I was to get a few more wins before the first of the year, I could get 100 here. Then I would need 3 or 4 more wins in a row basically to get to this, and 3 and 4 more wins in a row to get to this. And it just isn't really viable in that time frame that I would get to Diamond 5, which is the best I could hope. Really, is just to make it to Diamond 5 so that at the new month I would fall back down to Platinum 5, and then over the course of the month maybe make it to Diamond 5 again, and even further to Master. They added Diamond and Master as ranks, so where Platinum was the maximum rank for the best players, it has now become really the middle rank for mediocre players, and there's less of a system here as far as bronze and rookie. Once you get up to these ranks, once you're the bronze, you're not likely to really fall back down. Though I kind of think it still does push you back down. You just don't know how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! If you're still stuck at rookie and bronze. Even the starter deck should get you to at least silver. Then we have an ending soon thing that's already purchased. Protector. Okay, well, so let's go through this. So quickly, there are a decent amount of Christmas things that have been put out that say Happy Holidays or Christmas. We could do the whole War on Christmas nonsense and say which ones say Happy Holidays, which ones say Merry Christmas, whatever, but particularly I think if you're putting out a Happy Holidays on December 25th, you're implicitly saying Merry Christmas anyways. you kind of have to go out of your way to not say Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays. Here's a Sega official Christmas. I assume this is a rendered image or a miniature. Might be a miniature. You have little Sonic cookies and then chocobos and other things that are kind of almost like Easter egg things. And there's something kind of interesting about that idea. This definitely is a picture that you would want to go over with a fine-tooth comb and see if you can see all the Easter eggs, and you probably would want to click on the image to get a higher resolution of the image. But yeah, the Steam Winter Sale, which noticeably doesn't say Happy Holidays or Merry Christmas, is still going on, and that's really the only discounts is the sales. Some of these are like Dragon Quest X. You'd have to kind of be familiar with it. Noticeably, this is a Japanese Dragon Quest Twitter putting out a Christmas thing. So at some level, a very minimal level, the Japanese are kind of in the Christmas spirit. I don't think they actually do too much other than the cliched ordering KFC chicken for Christmas. They don't really do that much for Christmas. Certainly they're not getting into the deep Christian themes of Christmas. Cards RPG does Christmas. And this is something that you'll see almost exclusively, at least publicly shown, from Asian countries and Japanese companies in particular, in which you have the mixture of romance in Christmas, whereas in the United States in particular, Christmas is almost 100% a kid's holiday, and there is no emphasis really or thought as far as what adults do to celebrate Christmas or romantic couples do, unless you're watching a Hallmark channel and movie, and even in that, most of the time the Hallmark channel movies where there's a romance in the Christmas movie is still very benign and childlike in its simplicity. You don't get the high heel lewd imageries that don't really exist at all, as far as fashion goes. But yeah, here you have a perhaps little low effort Happy Holidays from Resident Evil, in which they've just taken a rendered image of the character and then thrown in what looks like stock images of Christmas things. But yeah, certainly this is probably as much effort, if not a little more effort, than most Japanese companies want to do. Resident Evil inherently does not work as far as a Christmas theme. A horror game, if they were going to have a Christmas theme at all, would probably just have a horror event set during the time of Christmas, which, yeah, that could certainly work, but that's not really Resident Evil's case. And then Team Sonic the Hedgehog, or Sonic the Hedgehog official Twitter, has a fully 2D animated Christmas image. Again, Sega properties here, going all out, putting a lot of details in it, a lot of Easter eggs, an image you really want to look at for more than a second, compared to this, which you barely want to look at it for a second. And that's kind of the problem with Christmas cards. These are effectively digital Christmas cards anyways, and it's just kind of wasteful. It's wasteful, a bit of artistic art. Like, there's never going to be, well, there might be one museum in the world at some point in the future around Christmas cards, where there would be walls of Christmas cards and you would go and look at the Christmas cards. But if that museum never existed, there's never going to be a situation where you get a Christmas card and you're going to look at it for more than a minute, and that you're going to want to put it on the wall as if it was a painting. Some of the Christmas cards probably are based on paintings, and the paintings usually are larger, different ratio, different scale. And the original paintings are probably worth looking at, but the form factor of a Christmas card is small and just kind of usually not that interesting. And so it just kind of feels like it's wasteful art. Somebody's either going to put very little effort in it and then it can't be really appreciated, or they're going to put a lot of effort into it and still it won't be appreciated. So the whole concept kind of falls apart. Clearly you're not seeing companies doing like 25 images for the 25 days of Advent, that's where you would probably take it to the next level if you were going to do something like that, is just have a different character from a different game from Sega and put a decent amount of effort into each of the images, and then you would have 25 of them. Moreover, though, I think most people would prefer just to have either one big reward in-game as far as an item or an icon or sticker or something, or 25 smaller items in-game for Advent instead of just putting it on your Twitter. This is an expansion centered around the holiday of the problem around social media and Twitter is that people feel a need to post, companies feel a need to post, and it's just not. I don't even know if this image actually was supposed to be Christmas themed or not. It kind of feels Christmas themed, but it could just be, I'd say the trees here say it's Christmas themed. Yeah, when you click on the images, you're still not getting particularly high resolution. This is another problem I think with the internet, is that as our resolutions of monitors have gone up, we really don't have great compression for images as far as web pages go. Like we haven't implemented AV1, I believe is what it's called, as far as a new video streaming standard with more compression. And when we talk about really large photos on web pages, I don't think there's been any real new standard since probably WebP, which Google tried to implement WebP as a web photo standard, and it sort of is a standard, but very few people use it. We're still mostly using JPEGs. We're still getting images that look fine if you don't look too close, but as soon as you really want to see detail, it starts to get fairly pixely. Whereas ideally you'd want everything to be vector imaged, and I could just zoom in and zoom in and zoom in. It would just keep on re-rendering. There is probably a technology that could be developed for some kind of deep learning super sampling, to take a small image and just make up information to continuously add more and more detail as you zoom in. Of course, the problem with that is if it doesn't work, as you zoom in, it will be adding entire vistas of images that aren't there instead of just adding more of the same color. Saneland has a happy holidays. The people who like Dragon Ball Z's creator Akira Toriyama probably still are somewhat hyped on Saneland, but it's not a game that's out yet. Here we have a Pac-Man and a snow globe. This is the kind of art that you could put out, make it once, do a decent job, and then put it out every year, and nothing would really change. Pac-Man's been around forever. And I guess we are very heavily in the Happy Holidays factor. We have Grandia with Happy Holidays. Gung Ho America, the company, which I don't know what Gung Ho has made recently. This is kind of a generic thing with no indication of any game recently. Major Nelson going Merry Christmas to all. And if you don't celebrate Christmas, Happy Monday. And then 14 hours ago he said, significant other to everyone who has to work on Christmas Eve, I see you. I assume that's his significant other saying that, is what S/O stands for. Or maybe it's supposed to be shout out. Maybe shout out would make more sense, wouldn't it? I wouldn't think S/O meant shout out to everyone. Yeah. Larry Herb, formerly known as Major Nelson, has not really announced anything. We'll probably see things. We'll probably see him join more boards, at least over the course of next year. It's kind of funny he has his LinkedIn, but LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft, so it wouldn't make a lot of sense that he added that. What's more funny is that tweets may have affiliate links because money, and then that envelope, and then apparently there's an email address here. You can reach him at hi@herb.me, which, yeah, if you're owning your own domain and your own email address, that's probably a height of being a little too rich. Let's see. Cyan put a render here of a Christmas tree inside of the library in Mist Island. I wouldn't say it's particularly a great render. Feels fairly rough, honestly. That too didn't say Merry Christmas. Yeah, we really only got about 2 Merry Christmases and then well over 10 or 12 things. Not super surprising though. Most game companies tend to not want to cause controversy, and they tend to lean more liberal, so they see not causing controversy by saying Happy Holidays and being inclusive, whereas conservative people see saying Happy Holidays as a direct affront and attack on Christmas and being exclusive to Christmas itself. Or, which, yeah, I think Merry Christmas on December 25th is fine. Happy Holidays on December 26th is fine. Happy Holidays on December 24th, Christmas Eve, is fine. I think they're both fine, really. I think most people don't care one way or another. Central Gaming has a Discord server, which I kind of thought they already did, but maybe he's just re-promoting it. Then his tweet before that is for November 26th about his laptop dying as the terrible things happening to him continue to happen. But he hasn't had anything terrible that I've seen him complain about recently, so maybe his life is getting a little bit better, or maybe he's just gotten lucky. Let's see, I think this is probably, yeah. Apparently YouTube has a secret team, small channel should watch this, from TubeBuddy. I was going to watch that video later. And then Video Games Chronicle in particular is doing these 2024 preview type articles. Probably not a lot of substance here. Like, against all odds, Stalker 2 continues to focus on the finish line as half the team continues to live in an actual war zone, GSC Games World's most personal project nears completion. Which, yeah, there's probably not a lot of new information in these end of the year looking at towards 2024 articles. It's just them rehashing old information. Alright. SteamDB is free and they want you to send a gift, which I assume is probably them asking for donations, which, in fairness, SteamDB probably has saved me a few bucks. And if you use the SteamDB plugin while shopping on Steam, it probably has saved you from making big mistakes. As far as the numbers in the last 24 hours, which would have been basically Christmas Eve, the numbers still look very high. Let's see if we can get these numbers to actually be in the right order. Seeing like GTA up in the 200,000s, Team Fortress 2 in the 200,000s. We don't get below 100,000 until the 16th spot. Doesn't feel like there was a major jump though in the last 24 hours. And my chart, if it is to be believed, doesn't really seem to indicate a major jump. Team Fortress 2 went up, and Baldur's Gate 3 went up a little bit, but then there's a lot of them that are still trending downward. And that makes a lot of sense too. People are busy, so it's just not really believable that an extra amount of people would influx today. Now, tomorrow, or yesterday, it's not believable to be a big influx yesterday, Christmas Eve. This Christmas, I can see people getting gaming laptops, gaming PCs. The meme is always plug your video card into the slot at the bottom of your PC, not into the I/O panels with all the other holes and plugs of your PC. If you have a graphics card, which you almost certainly do. Otherwise, you might get graphics, but it will be very low performance graphics from the onboard CPU graphics chipset. So yeah, we might see particularly PC gamers going up tomorrow or over the next few days. I could also see if somebody was to just hand me a pre-built computer, there's a decent chance there would just be a lot of setup and a lot of work around that, and I could see it just taking a while to download Steam, download games, and get around to getting it all to work. Unless you have a tech literate friend or family member who's set up everything for you, just pre-download games, pre-downloaded Steam, so that you can have that excitement. You just don't really have that Christmas Day console experience where a Switch could be set up in about 20 minutes and from scratch, and if it's pre-set up, Switch would be playable just as it goes. And I imagine the next Nintendo console, they're going to try for even more of that, as much as possible, where you'll have one screen where you just verify an age, verify you agree to all terms and services, and log into the Nintendo online service, which will probably have some kind of free tier mandatory login and connect to the Wi-Fi. I could see doing all of that on one screen and then doing the setup very quickly in like 5 minutes and being done with it. Although it may also be 5 screens instead of just one screen. But the idea of installing updates and all of that could be done automatically or just skipped on the initial setup. Yeah, it'll be very interesting on Wednesday to see if we see a jump in games. the winter sale is still going on, and yeah, there's still not really too much to do with. Like, if you've done the year of the review, if you're not going to shop, I guess at a certain level I'm going to have to decide whether I want to buy more games or whether I want to save up for a Steam Deck. Or maybe I'll just pull the trigger on the Steam Deck now. Now would be an interesting time to pick that. I really haven't been looking at the Discover queue. Everything has just stopped me because I've been working on the Smart On Air sign, and I really just want to finish that project and then start the next phase of that project, which is to actually start the business and start the listing and see if people will actually buy it. Now, as far as actual news goes, we're going to be very low. Let's see. Ghostwire Tokyo is currently free on the Epic Games Store. You have 24 hours to claim it. Happy Holidays from Video Games Chronicles. The Day Before will shut down in less than 2 months after its release. That's something we've already talked about. Epic Games Store game before this was Art of Rally. And then the Good Old Games Winter Sale has added its third free game. And then Insomnia broke its silence about the extremely distressing data breach, which nobody's really talking about that. Well, nobody's really talking at all at the moment. And see, that's all of the GameDeveloper.com articles for today. So, and I don't expect there to be too much more. I do expect next year, tomorrow, Gamatsu will come out with a collection of all the Happy Holidays cards in one long article that it saw, since they were retweeting a lot of the Happy Holidays cards from their Twitter people. But I imagine GameDeveloper.com and Video Games Chronicles are not going to do much of anything until the new year, which Wednesday may be a short stream too because of that. Front Mission First Remake has a Mercenaries update being announced, adding new single-player scenarios, local multiplayer, and more. Is this on Steam? Yes, it is. It's already on the fall list from June 30th. Grand Blue Fantasy Relink PS4 and 5 demo launches in January of 2024. Playable characters include these 3 being announced. Which, okay. More details on a game that's not out yet. Which, certainly there's time to watch every trailer if I wanted to. But I actually didn't go through all the games today, so I think we're going to go through all of those live today. Grand Blue Fantasy Versus Rising DLC characters 2B, Vayne, and Beatrix have been announced, with Lucilius launching January 16th of 2024. Let's see. I don't recognize this character. Don't recognize this character. I feel like I've seen a character like this. This is Lucilius. Of course, I recognize 2B from Nier Automata. And there's a different character here and here from Nier Automata, but I couldn't really tell you who those are. I guess these are probably outfits for existing characters in Grand Blue Fantasy. And then avatar versions of them. Vayne and Beatrix I don't recognize either. Black Butterfly. I'm usually not a fan of the lobby avatar chibi versions of art. Honestly, it often feels like it's just completely unnecessary stuff that really just feels to me like you could just not have that art style at all, and you could take this art style and just scale it down. But I guess that probably doesn't work. I'm noticing that my audio is every now and then glitching. You're probably not hearing it, but I constantly have that problem. And then it's possibly once again a case of the RAM being overclocked, or overclocking itself. There's a character in the mobile game that's now shut down that I used to play, Destiny Child, called Seth, that looked somewhat similar to this, but not considerably similar. Not enough that I would claim that it was even really an inspiration. We did talk about Tencent and NetEase losing $80 billion of its valuation because China announced even more strict new rules against video games. Yeah, I think we talked about that. Apparently a company called Versus Evil is going to shut down, and there's an update. This was a Baltimore-based publisher closing its door after 10 years. Let's see what the update says. According to Versus Evil, its upcoming releases will now be published by TinyBuild. This very possibly was the publisher I was talking about in the last stream, where even though we've seen a ton of layoffs as far as game developers, their publishers, for the most part, have been untouched with the most recent downturn in the economy, I guess is what you would call it. Struggles, financial struggles that the gaming industry seems to have. Whereas it really feels like publishers should be running out of money and shutting down a lot more. But inherently, publishers are just always going to be better funded, and they can just weather storms for a longer amount of time than game developers, where game developers are usually not that well funded, and if they go 3 or 4 months without any income, they're probably doomed. They may not be able to go 3 or 4 weeks without any income. And then I think we've already talked about Yuna and the Haunted Hot Springs launching adding a PS5, Switch, iOS, and Android versions, launching January 18th. And see, that in its entirety was the Gematsu news for this Christmas Day. And then game developer is still broken, but also by reload here just to double check, there has not been a new bit of news since the 22nd at gamedeveloper.com. If they put out any new information at all, we could go to the home and not just filter down to news and see if there's possibly some other thing they put out more recently. Nope, everything says December 22nd here. Yeah, latest updates was December 22nd. So my speculation as far as why GameDeveloper.com would be the one to target with a virus, if you had snuck in access when they changed their website layout, and potentially changed a lot more in the background as far as service providers and passwords and things like that, or just the plugins, the WordPress probably plugins that they're using. Yeah, that would be the reason why I would have thought this would have been the place that would have been vulnerable to have somebody sneak in a phishing virus that would just automatically try and download to people's computers every time they load a page. But you see that if that was the case, it's working very well too. Nobody in charge of GameDeveloper.com seems to have looked at or published any new content since the 22nd, so potentially they updated their appearance somewhere slightly before the 22nd. Somebody put in a virus, got access at that point. Nobody has looked at it for several days since the 22nd, which would have been Friday, I believe. And now, if this is the website that has a virus on it, it's wreaking havoc. And potentially nobody's going to notice it for several more days, possibly until the new year. So on that, I think somebody probably did well. Now, somewhere last week, there was an actual successful load of the fall list. I mean, Friday. And I should not close that page. And I should heavily try and filter out things from the fall list going forward. Right now, the fall list is totally not loading. Let's see. So yeah, the fall list cleanup from Friday's stream somehow worked. But the problem here is I'm noticing none of these want to load. So here we have like a double dragon game I can put on the wish list very easily from the fall list because it's very positive, it's not in early access, all that. I think we can probably say that is true for all the double dragon games because there's just a historical relevance here. But yeah, here's the page I don't want to close, which means I should come over here to this side. Whereas games like this, I probably would still keep on the fall list. Games like this, I'd probably still keep on the fall list. But if it meets the requirements, it really should just move to the wish list. Of course, I'm not really solving a lot by just making my wish list twice as big. Ideally, we want to find things that can just leave. Something like this is a great example of something that can leave. And then something like this is unlikely to be relevant anyways. January, February, March. So I need to probably just make executive decisions as far as whether it's something I want to play. Here we have a spin-off of Super Meat Boy that's mixed reviewed, and I can say no to that because I didn't even finish Super Meat Boy, so why would I play a spin-off that's just that? This one's from June of 2023. And as soon as we get into 2024, there definitely is a case where I can start to look at games from like 2023 with a little bit more of a harsh eye. And in that way, start to be a little bit more critical and cruel as to what is on the fall list and what's going to go away. So here's a game from December 20th, and we're just going to go through everything. I reloaded my Firefox browser, so none of these pages are preloaded, which is a shame. I'd almost say yes to that, but no. It's just a whole new system now, where only things that I really care about are going to go on the fall list, and everything else, if I make a YouTube short on it, I'm just going to risk making duplicate YouTube shorts on it in an effort to not flood the fall list with a bunch of games that are good enough for a YouTube short, but aren't actually the style of game I would ever actually consider playing. Dolls. Well, it looks creepy. It's probably not too much of anything as far as a horror game. There is definitely that problem where if you were trying to cover, seems like there's multiple versions of this game, if you were trying to cover a series of horror games, you probably would end up doing a better job playing very small horror games that are focused around one theme and doing an anthology series than trying to play something like Resident Evil, even though Resident Evil games sometimes are really just an anthology of different horror elements. Here we have a game called Christmas Girls that is probably been somewhat censored, again only from that anime art aesthetic. What you have, like tight fitting, cleavage showing Christmas outfits like this, whereas in the West you traditionally are getting ugly sweaters that cover everybody else, which at the very least a sweater slash jumper has an actual practical use of warming people in the coldest months of the year, so it kind of makes some sense there. But yeah, the idea of an implied romance in Christmas in the West is totally gone, or not never existed, and where it's definitely the case here in a lot of these Japanese inspired, if not Japanese made games. I would say this was probably not a Japanese made game by the look of the animation style being a little rough, and by the fact that this has just the cell phone ads of you're releasing water and releasing lava, pulling the pins. This time they've made it Christmas themed with candy canes, but the visuals look pretty rough here, and it seems like you're barely doing anything. All the interaction is in the resolution of what a cell phone would be, and then they've just added a anime girl background to make it widescreen. Very low effort. There was an article on Reddit where somebody was talking about how they really wish they could find a good quality adult game. There was almost immediately in that discussion a assumption that he meant AAA adult game, which at a certain level, yes, AAA developers having to deal with console rules and publisher rules and just having something more to lose, tends not to have adult content, sexual in nature content, although you do have a little bit of that in Cyberpunk and Witcher 3, both made by CD Projekt Red from Europe, a European country, and Baldur's Gate 3, which I think Baldur's Gate 3's developer might be also European. But yeah, there were some suggestions, and there were some websites that were suggested, and there definitely was talk about how the games being suggested aren't really prominent or existent at all on Steam. So while Steam may be the de facto storefront for non-adult games, which is the vast majority of games, they have totally dropped the ball. There's a website they talked about called F95, which I don't even recognize. I think that was the name of it. And then there's a DL site, which is mostly the case of what you would see Japanese games posted on, is DL site. And then there are definitely some games that are uniquely on their own small websites. But most of those websites don't make great games. They may make still significantly better games than what gets dumped on Steam. And so I guess if I was going to hope for any improvement in 2024, I would like to see a continued trend of more adult games on Steam and a continued trend of quality adult games on Steam, which we've yet to really see a lot of them that are quality. There's another G mode game that we're also still, or more than likely, going to see a continued trend of Japanese only games being put on Steam, as we see a continued trend of Japanese gamers moving to PC from potentially playing PlayStation or consoles or Switches exclusively. I'd like to see an end of the trend of the Airy series. There's probably about 30 Airy games that have been shoveled onto Steam, and it is pretty much just asset flip things that often look very pretty, but you're just playing as a bird flying around, and that's pretty much it. I think it's, if I was to guess, probably 5 minutes of experience. I can't inherently hate a puzzle game like Pixel here, which is seemingly a jigsaw puzzle with pictures with letters instead of numbers, versus Pick Cross. But I don't need to put that on the follow list. Yeah, smaller calming games are more preferable. Seems like there's several here being released. Are they all by the same people? Latte Games? Yeah, they are. I'd like to see an end of that trend of developers and publishers putting multiple games out on the exact same day. It just doesn't make any sense at all. It's kind of like betting on black and red at the roulette table in the same spin. You're almost inherently going to screw yourself up. Here's a programming game of some sort, which I'll put on the follow list just to see if it's well received. But yeah, I would prefer more small calming games to come out over shovelware. Things that people actually care about and actually going to try. This looks like an asset flip game. I'd like to see less asset flip games. I could personally say perhaps less strategy games, less space games, less 4X games, but that would be just my personal opinion, so it wouldn't make a lot of sense to say you'd actually want to see that. Clearly, strategy games are still somewhat popular amongst their fan base. I'd like to see less troll games for the betterment of society in general, less asset flip games, less garbage games. But yeah, I'd like to see more sales. I'd like to see the continued potential improvement of the Steam Deck. Even if I was to buy a Steam Deck now, if 6 months down the line they say we're going to have a slightly improved version of it, I wouldn't be super upset. I guess I'm going to say no to this one. It's not quite animated well enough. I'd like to see a continued adoption of the Steam Deck. I'd really like to see a cheaper version of the Steam Deck. Yeah, it's still not really a viable contender against. I feel like I've heard of this game before, but weirdly it's not on the follow list. But yeah, the Steam Deck is not really a contender to a Switch, particularly if a new Nintendo console comes out and it is backward compatible. I'd like to see an end of the trend of games like this that are clearly having lewd imagery in it, but and are tagged as hentai, mature, sexual content, all four of these tags here should automatically require games to be in the adult section, and yet somehow there is some way that this game is not on the adult section, and this is almost certainly a low effort game that actually doesn't have any adult content, and it is getting tagged in with Shadowverse, a real game, the original Shadowverse, not the rebooted Shadowverse. Yeah. You can see a negative review already for it. I'd like to see that trend go away, but it's also hard to really expect the trend of trying to sneak adult games outside of the adult section when the adult section literally is by default not viewable by the vast majority of people who have Steam accounts. There needs to be more ends overall to say, hey, there are some adult games. We do have an adult section on the storefront, even if you've chosen to hide it. Like, in general, I think category numbers might make a lot of sense. If on the front page they said, since you last visited, there's 500 new RPGs and there's a dozen new card games, probably the opposite would be true. But if you just had numbers and you tried to trigger more people to look under certain categories for new games, of course the numbers would be kind of useless if you just told the total numbers, but you could certainly say, we've got some games that we think you'd be interested in the RPG category. Almost certainly we'll continue to see the trend of visual novels. Like, nothing's really going to stop them from being made. It is going to come down to if I ever really want to play any of them. Certainly, I guess I could make a whole wishlist cleanup at some point, just opening all the visual novels and looking at what has been reviewed the most and what is the most viable or relevant. Like, one here probably isn't that relevant in that it only has 90 reviews and either it came out of early access or this is fall list cleanup visual novels. Yeah, this is a new game, so maybe it was in early access, or maybe I would have to think it was just in early access, and I'd like to see that trend go away too, as far as games that don't need an early access claiming to be in early access, or games that shouldn't be in early access being in early access. But overall, as far as Steam and the video game community, 2024 can be a pretty decent year in my mind. The only real problem is, are we actually going to see good games, particularly AAA games, in 2024? Because we definitely didn't see it in 2023, and that's fine to happen for 1 or 2 years. Blame the pandemic, blame whatever you want. To have a break and catch up, but it feels like if it just kept on going, and we did have this situation where you're struggling to even name 5 games that you personally want to play in a year, that could just decline the fandom overall, the entire fandom. There's another RPG Maker game that's tagged with tags that almost certainly shouldn't be allowed. And I'd like to see this trend certainly go away. The RPG Maker games in general, but the RPG Maker games in particular that are 99% these kind of screenshots but then they are advertised more often than not with just the static visual novel elements and anime characters. Often anime characters in lewd clothing or with giant boobs. Not the case in this game though, I will say. So it deserves at least that bit of credit. But yeah, we really need a good 7 to 10 AAA games coming out in 2024, and with the layoffs maybe we won't really see that, or we'll just continue to see terrible trends as far as microtransactions and games as a service, and that may continue to just degrade. I doubt the gaming community and the gaming industry would just completely collapse like it did before the NES happened, but I could see a similar situation where there's just so many bad games that I'll give this a chance, that people lose faith in the industry. Now, if you were to lose faith in the video game industry, I don't know what you replace it with. It's not like books have gotten better, TV hasn't gotten better, movies haven't gotten better. It would almost have to be a new form of entertainment, a lot more movement, I imagine, to mobile games. Give this a chance. It's weird enough. Yeah, I could see a lot more people playing mobile games that are full of ads but free otherwise, and spending a lot more time doing that. Weird, an Arkanoid game with Arkanoid in the name just being snuck out on December 21st. And that could certainly just snowball and feed into itself as far as a resonance problem, where all of a sudden more and more gamers choose to play mobile games instead of playing AAA games that have live services and microtransactions in it, and then all the money continues to push towards mobile, and then you have the likes of Microsoft and Sony pushing deeper into making mobile games, and so then there's just never going to be a way that a publisher, I would say yes to this, but it's already mixed, publishers are going to start saying we only fund mobile games and we won't fund the development of anything else. This looks like garbage, but there is a kind of interesting fact in the 2D black and white comic strip element, which you almost never see this in games. I can name maybe 2 games over the past my entire lifetime where I've seen comic strip panels even. This is maybe the first time I've ever seen a black and white comic strip. Maybe that would work in some scenarios. Then you have what feels like an early 90s super skinny elf girl here, just really thin legs and arms, and yeah, same thing here. Of course, this harpy character's outfit doesn't really match, but yeah, really long strung out neck and relatively thin legs, and yeah, that's usually not the ratios you tend to see. Usually you're seeing more short and stubby animation styles. Yeah, a race to mobile could be a race to the bottom. I notice I say yeah a lot, and then I go back to my previous thought. It's probably not very easy to follow me because of that. I apologize, but I also am just talking off the top of my head. On that aspect, as far as a race to the bottom, and potentially there just being a case where AAA games can't thrive and can't survive and won't be funded by publishers in the future, or won't be fundable in general. I'll give this a chance. Starfield on Steam has now approached mostly negative in its reviews. And that's not a death blow by any means, but it is certainly not a good situation. I'm sure Microsoft's not happy about it. I'm sure Bethesda and ZeniMax are not happy about it either. Now, it is worth remembering, though, that No Man's Sky, I believe it was, also had fairly negative reviews when it first launched, and then over the course of spending a lot of energy on it, they patched it and fixed it and added more features, and now people do sing the praises of No Man's Sky. And Bethesda potentially could be in a situation where that would work for them fairly well, because they're going to be so slow anyways to release the next Elder Scrolls game that they could potentially turn everything around on Starfield and have people still hyped, or even more hyped, for the next Elder Scrolls game. I'll give this a chance. But yeah, it's definitely not what anybody wants. Definitely not what I had hoped for Starfield. I didn't really hope for much in Starfield's case, but it would have been nice if it was a surprise game. There definitely this year hasn't been any nice surprises as far as games. Here we have a Korean game that's only in Korean, thus the slightly different art style, more browns, not really going for the moe kawaii art styles, where the characters are anatomically incorrect by a large amount. Like, you have smaller eyes, heads maybe a little big but not super big. Yeah, Korean art style is fairly distinguishable between the Japanese art styles and people aping the Japanese art styles, copying the Japanese art styles, the anime art styles. I haven't gotten down to the full details though, where I could see like an Indian art style or Palestinian art style or Chinese art. Chinese art styles are somewhat easy to recognize. No Taiwanian or Australian or Filipino art styles. Of course, some of those countries are so small that they probably don't have enough animators to develop their own art style that I'd recognize, or they just aren't putting games on Steam, which might be another case. And in a significant amount of cases, animators in a smaller country very well may be told to try to copy the anime art style for some show like a Netflix series. The Scott Pilgrim versus the World anime, quote unquote anime, is perhaps a interesting example of that, in which the animation style is nothing close to the anime art style, and yet they're still calling it an anime, even though Scott Pilgrim vs. the World as a comic book was written by a Westerner for a Western audience and was only slightly inspired by anime amongst many other things. Or also, it is worth mentioning, and this is only a slight spoiler for the first episode, that Scott Pilgrim is really not the protagonist of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World in Netflix, and the same thing happened with He-Man Masters of the Universe, in which He-Man is really not the protagonist for that show. And so there's a pattern now of at least 2 points, probably more could be pointed out, in which animated shows based on pre-existing media have been used to bait and switch and change who the protagonist is. Which A lot of people are not going to be happy about this. This looks like this is a German-only game. Yeah, it's German-only. You don't see a lot of that. This game is currently only available in Germany. Well, that's not true. Oh, no, it doesn't say Germany. It says German, which I guess that is true. And weirdly, this looks like this could be an RPG Maker game, but if it is, it's using a different version of RPG Maker. It's more zoomed in. Certainly, it looks much closer to 16-bit graphics from the Super NES era, or later, than it does 8-bit graphics from the NES era. Inherently, even the art styles like this, though, highlights why, at least to a Western audience, most of the RPGs lost all their fandom in consoles when the Nintendo 64 came out and it was all about 3D graphics. If you were playing something like Mario 64 and then you swapped over to a game that looked like this would just feel very much out of place and old. And even if you were trying to make an RPG game, you would have to make it more 3D, like Phantasy Star Online, which just means you have to put more time and effort and money into the animation aspect and less time into the rest of the development, which I think created a situation where RPG games may have gotten even more grindy and less that's not the button I meant to click, and less less approachable by new players. So if I use my translated program, this is called Forgotten Symphony. Let's see. So it won't be easy in the future, right? Climate change, overpowering corporations, total surveillance. Ellie tries to lead a completely normal life when an unknown hacker gains access to her brain chip and begins to take over her body. Interesting. Yeah. Unfortunately, even if I did want to play this game, my translation program does not translate in games. That is something AI could do very well, and maybe that would just be an overlay screen reader built into Windows, but we really are at a point where you should be able to translate entire things on the screen into your language. That is something that I probably won't do anything about, but I'm certainly thinking about as far as the instructions of setting up my Smart On Air sign and putting it in different language. At a certain level, though, I'd also have to have a sign that said on air in that other language. Probably couldn't pull that off, so I could change the instructions and do a rough translation. But the meaning may very well be lost in the instructions. In most of the cases, most people can translate English to their language better themselves than a company trying to do it. But yeah. Supporting a few more languages would be a nice feature to have. That would probably be a low priority scaling up issue too, though. I would have to figure out all the laws and copyrights and protections you might have in a different country and all the rules to selling and how difficult it would be to sell something in a different country and whether it really is worth it. We should be done fairly quickly. I almost want to say yes to this, but don't know why. I guess maybe there's some twinge in me that likes dinosaurs. I don't recall ever liking dinosaurs when I was a little kid, though. If anything, I think my fandom of dinosaurs is severely limited to just seeing the first Jurassic Park movie and liking that movie well enough. Yeah, I gotta say no to that. If anything, also, Barney the dinosaur was out and annoying people of my age when he came out for his repetitiveness and his wholesomeness for very young kids. I was too cool for school and too old to appreciate Barney when he came out. Of course, a big purple dinosaur is hardly a real dinosaur. Yeah, people in Japan have fandoms for their insects and bug collecting, and I don't think that's quite as popular in the West, and instead reptile, dinosaur. In general, I guess most kids are somewhat interested and obsessed with animals and unique looking animals in general. Okay, so where are we here? So this was that was the entirety of all the games that came out in the last stream. So basically stopping on the 22nd, and then the next stream will cover the games that came out between the 22nd and the 25th. And if I get really lucky, I'll try to open a ton of these and close, unfollow, stop following a ton of these. It's a shame I can't automate this process, but even if I was to try to automate the process, I would spend way more time automating the process than just manually going to every page. Just considering I could probably do a light thing and just by the name try to judge things, but it's probably better just to visit the full Steam page. I thought if I hovered over something like this it would pop up something, but it doesn't seem like it is. Alright, well, so I don't even have an end of show tab to show as far as the thing, so we'll just end here. Yep, so that's gonna be it for this stream. I've got a little bit of Christmas duties to do myself, I'm sure, but overall I'm probably gonna spend the rest of the day just continuing to work on programming. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy whatever else you may be celebrating. And yeah, as always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.